Well, hello, hello, hello. It's Dr. Stephanie Ardrey, known as Dr. Money. I am coming to you on this beautiful Friday, August 1st, from beautiful sunny Jamaica. And today I am going to walk you through parts of my book called Show Me the Money, the Nine P's to Profit. And the reason I selected this book is I was out with someone yesterday and we were coming from a meeting, and the person asked me if they were trying to determine how to invest in real estate or how to invest in a business, where would they begin? How would they go about finding a market opportunity? They presented that question to me in particular, being that I've transplanted myself from the US to Jamaica to pursue my business interest. And that appeared to be a bit of a bold move. And in that question was also a question of, do I have family? Is my family realizing sacrifices? Like, how is all of this happening? And what would make me so determined to execute on my business plans? So when I thought about, I gave him some quick responses, but I also recognized that I have some very clear ways, approaches to identifying business opportunities, to being able to flesh them out and determine if they're feasible and why they're feasible, when they will be feasible, because sometimes my challenge has been being such a visionary that I see a market opportunity decades before the rest of the market catches up. And so there's nothing wrong with being a visionary, but what it means is you go about financing a business like that differently than you would finance a business that has a market that is reasonably aware of the solution that you plan to present to the market. So what I wanted to do when I thought about it is I was like, dang, I could really help this guy, but I don't have time to help him individually in a one-on-one capacity. What would probably be a better approach would be to record a series of segments responding and building on this particular question and conversation. And that way I could help many people. And so that's what I decided to do. And I thought the best way to begin to do that is to go back to a book that I wrote and published back in 2012, Show Me the Money, the Nine P's to Profit. And although the catchy name, I was really playing on the idea of a lot of people start businesses with flaws. If they're flawed from the beginning, which means they're flawed throughout the process, which means they're probably flawed at the end. We know, statistically speaking, that over 80% of the businesses that are launched each year will not make it 5 years. Probably more than that. I'm being a little generous. It's probably more like 90% will fail and 10 will exist for 5 years. As a result of that, the idea of taking on a startup seems like a daunting task. And you might ask someone, why go through 5 years of insanity to hopefully end up with something? Well, now we get to have that conversation and another conversation. Many of the boomers who have had businesses are beginning to retire and exit those businesses. And without a great succession plan or an exit plan, many of those businesses are going to lose enormous potential value. And it's only because in the beginning, the end was not considered. You know, somebody laughed at me the other day in a conversation when I said, well, we were talking about discussing a business relationship. And I said, one thing that you have to understand about my position at this stage of my journey, I've kissed enough frogs to know a few things. One, Yeah, I call it kissing frogs. I kissed enough frogs to know a couple things about myself. One, I'm not interested in doing business with anyone that cannot be created from a win win perspective, meaning a positive sum game, a win win outcome. We have to both engage in the business opportunity and have a reasonable win. Otherwise, we won't do business. I don't have time for it because of what I know is a win lose proposition is not sustainable. Eventually, that relationship is going to blow up. In either way, if I'm the one that's losing, I won't be able to stay in business taking losses. If the other person is losing, they won't be able to sustain their business taking losses. So, win win is the only opportunity that allows us both to sustain our business and our operations, our relationships. So, where does one begin? Let me give you the highlights. In my 9 P's to profit, I might show you the many 9 P's to profit. I came up with the typical 4 P's, right? If you've ever studied marketing, you've heard the term the 4 P's to marketing. And that is product, place, price, and promotion. Those are the 4 P's, the basic P's for marketing. And what that means is you must address those particular areas in marketing any business. Product is used for business or service interchangeably, but that's the product. I realized over the course of my journey that there were a few other P's that are worth entertaining and considering. And so in my book, Show Me the Money, the 9 P's to Profit, I added to that list purpose, because I think it's important to have a very clear purpose before you develop the product. So I have purpose, then I have the product, then I have place, your point of distribution, then I have the people, because your business will interact with people. You have internal and external stakeholders, and they each play a role. Position. What is the market position that you're seeking for your business? Promotions. How do you plan to inform, encourage, motivate, and call to action those who are interested in your product? Performance. What is the quality standard that you're using to gauge if it is your product is of quality? Price. What are the pricing mechanisms that you're using to determine the price? And lastly, profit. If you don't plan to profit, you won't. So making sure that you have developed a product or service that you can take from concept to completed transaction and do so profitably. Because if you can't make a profit, your business is not sustainable. It will not be sustainable. It must make a profit. All right. So let's jump in. So, right now, we're going to talk about purpose. Now, you may think purpose is a unrelated uh, P. Where would purpose come to play in my business creation? Well, let me tell you why purpose is so important. When we talk about our life journey, I remember reading a book by Dr. Stephen Covey called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And some of the principles that he shares in that book is the importance of using a measure of beginning living your life with the end game in mind. And in that end game, he says, imagine that you are at your own funeral, you're being eulogized. And someone from your family, someone from the community, someone from your profession, and other general peers are all making comments about the contributions that you made to humanity. They're all speaking about you. What is it that you would hope people say about you as they recall the legacy that you've lived? What would you want people to highlight as your attributes and your contributions to humanity? I lived my life for a long time from that perspective. I've lived my life from that perspective before I even knew that I was living it from that perspective. Let me explain. I became fascinated with business somewhere between 3, 4, 5 years old. The reason I know I was that young is because I lived with my grandmother and she had a collection. My uncle, in fact, had procured this collection of legal code books. In fact, I still have them in my library today. And I was curious about the law. So I used to read these books on corporations and all of these things. I don't know if I really took in all of what the meanings were behind these things, but I just knew that I was interested in. And so those were the early seeds. We as kids, we played a lot of things. And we would play school. We would rotate who got to be the teacher. And I remember when it was my turn to be the teacher, my friends would complain because they were like, oh my goodness, it's Stephanie's turn, so we're really going to learn stuff. And so I've been a teacher all my life. And we would play entertaining. I was a dancer. My uncle uh, was a musician. My grandmother, musician, wrote songs later in her career, but my uncle early from the time I arrived. And I was a musician. I played piano, played violin later, and I was a dancer. Uh, you turn on the music, and I was dancing. And so, oftentimes in my high chair, as my uncle played on the piano, I would just be moving and dancing in that high chair. And I still love dancing today, and I still love music today. In fact, I miss not playing an instrument, and I've decided to give myself a challenge of picking up where I left off. I was supposed to be learning guitar. In fact, a good friend of mine recently passed, Dwayne from Tony. When we shared an office, that was one of the things we were supposed to do. Is he was going to teach me to play guitar because I played violin, and so I was already kind of in at least a string instrument category, but we never got around to it. Let that be a reminder to check in with your friends, your colleagues. Don't lose complete contact if possible. But anyway, back to my story. So early on, I loved music. And the last part of that, playing business, when I was 9, my mother bought our house and we moved from my grandmother's to our own home. And it was at that house that I had more time again to myself. And one of the things that I spent time doing was playing business. And I mean, I had the most comprehensive business because I loved forms. And she had been in the real estate business. She had sold Mary Kay. So all of these businesses that she had been part of where there were different forms, I loved completing those extra forms. And even when I was young, before we bought our house and during the early years of that ownership, she still was in the real estate business, residential at that time. So they would do Saturday neighborhood canvassing, and I would go out with them. Oftentimes, they would make contact, looking to see who wanted to sell, and then we go back to the office and follow up on all the leads. So I would be assigned the receptionist because at 9, I knew how to write very well, speak, and I could take messages and I could communicate back and forth to those, the messages to the other realtors, what the messages were. So I was a nice little tag along because I was actually productive. But it was really one of these days that I was playing business. I mean, my dolls were my customers. I had the Monopoly money. I had an old 10 key calculator. I didn't know what it meant to know 10 key, but I knew 10 key, by touch because that was my favorite way of feeling like I was completing transactions. And this particular day, we had gone out shopping and I noticed that all of the stores had credit card applications. And I said, oh my goodness, that's what's missing. My business needs credit cards. So I decided to go home and create credit cards for my business. Now, this will definitely date me. At that time, to complete a credit card transaction, you had a machine that created an imprint on paper. So I find these index cards and I color each index card. I made the MasterCard, I made a Visa card, I made, I guess, a Diners Club card. Like I had about 6 different credit cards that I made that day. And then after I finished drawing them all on the index cards, I then went to find my mother's photo album refills. I didn't know that, I needed plastic. So I cut each photo album refill to cover my index cards, carefully taping the plastic on top. And then I took a straight pen and pinpricked every letter and number that I needed to be raised so that when I put a paper on top of the card and took a pencil, I could create an imprint. And it was right about that point that I perfected my credit cards that my mother came into the bedroom to see what I was up to because I guess I've been quiet for a bit. And so when she came in and she saw that I had made these credit cards, her first reaction was, "What are you doing?" And it was one of those moments where I can recall pausing for a second and making sure that I responded correctly because tone in her voice let me know that my response could cause one or two reactions. Either I was going to be in trouble or not. And I wanted to not be in trouble. And so I told my mom, I said, "Oh my goodness, Mom, I know who I'm going to be." And she's kind of let out a nervous laugh. She's like, "Who?" I said, "Mom, I'm going to be an international business tycoon." And what she did next was really a sign of her brilliance. And she said, "Really?" She says, "Okay, baby, tell me more." And I said, "I see myself. I'm in the boardroom. I'm wearing a navy blue pinstripe suit. The San Francisco Bay Bridge is out the window. Everyone is paying attention. I'm leading the charge. They're listening to me. And for some reason, the then wealthiest man in the world was a Middle Eastern deal maker. And I just knew about these facts, because I was curious about business. When I was in elementary school, I remember studying Hiroshima. I remember watching the emergence of the shifts in economic cycles. I remember being curious about not only global organizations, but by the time I was 18, I was really looking at businesses that had sustained at least 100 years. And I was very curious about what a founder could have possibly had in their mind for their business to exist not only during their lifetime, but beyond their lifetime. And so that's what brought me to the point of understanding that purpose is where you began when you create a business venture. Just like in the real estate development world that I occupy, before I build any type of real estate development, I must understand what is the purpose of the development that I'm creating. What is the purpose? Because the purpose is going to inform a lot of decisions that I need to make in the beginning. If I wait to make them later, they can be costly modifications to the initial business plans. And in some cases, they can contribute to the failure of a business venture. For example, if I have a piece of land and I know that I want to build a high rise, then I must understand that the foundation necessary to support a high rise is a foundation that has to go a certain depth within the soil. It has to be built with a certain level of strength and structure in order to withstand the weight of that high rise. So, the foundation for a high rise is not the same foundation that's necessary if I'm building a single family residence. They're different. The costs are different, the expertise is different. And so, when you're thinking about the purpose of your business, you have to think about what is the purpose that you are forming a business. Why are you going into business? What is your vision? I say your purpose begins to speak to help you form and develop your vision and your mission statement. And so it's essential that you create it and that you create it with care and planning. So you want to make sure that when you think about business, am I buying a business? Am I building a business? What is the purpose of that business? And how will I realize the value from that business? Will I employ myself to work in that business right now? That could be creating a job for myself. Will I employ others to work in my business? That can create jobs for others and community. And how will I exit that business? You must determine that at the beginning because otherwise you'll find yourself, like many entrepreneurs are finding themselves at this point, wanting to sell a business that really, at best, can be sold for parts because what they successfully accomplished was they created a job for themselves. But nobody's going to pay you millions of dollars for a job. You must have a business that sustains, give pause to your revenue stream. That's what somebody's paying you for, is a revenue stream. And if it is that you don't have a revenue stream to substantiate the value that you're seeking to get, then at best you can discount the business or you can dissolve the business. But you really walk away not necessarily realizing the full value of that business. And I see that now. I'm in Jamaica. I see a significant market of businesses that would love to exit, and there's several impediments to the proper exit. One, many of those businesses have not built the value that correlate to the desired numbers for an exit. Number two, there's not a robust commercial lending market that supports the buy-in, the trading of businesses. So when you look to trade a business, you're challenged with finding adequate capital sources to facilitate those transactions. So there's a bit of a bottleneck in this particular market. And there's this similar type of bottleneck in many developing countries and markets. And so, through my lens, solving that problem has created another value proposition that I can add in my toolbox because it was in my effort to buy some of these businesses that I've uncovered all of the difficulties in completing a transaction in buying some of these businesses. And so I've had to create brand new models that work differently than the old models to be able to create a value for these businesses, a value that I could sustain in terms of a purchase price. Because just like anything else, when you buy a business, if you overpay for the business and you can never recoup that investment, then unfortunately it too is going to fail. The value that you want to create is you want to see where a business is and presume that you can add more value so that somebody else will be interested in paying you for that value at the point of exit. So, what we've been talking about in this segment is why purpose is where you begin in thinking about your business plans. You want to make sure that you understand what is the purpose of the business. And lastly, I'll tell you about a venture that I created specifically for a purpose, and that was it was meant to replace my job. I needed to have an income because I had a desire to create another business, but I could only do that if I had full control of my schedule. So I needed to create a business to replace my day job so that I also could begin working on my new business that I wanted to research and develop. And it was in an emerging market at the time. And so I found a way to identify a problem in the market. And at that time, I also looked at what I had as an asset. I wrote very well. I had developed other business plans and strategies. I'd had my first business at 18. So I had won an RFP. So I knew how to write and respond to state and government contracts. I knew how to write and respond to other things. And also, it was the early days of word processing. So, a lot of people were not computer literate or were just beginning to develop computer skills. So, I developed what's now popular. You would say, oh my goodness, that's just FedEx Kinkos. But believe it or not, before FedEx Kinkos existed, I created a company called Night Type Business Services. And what Night Type Business Services did was we handled overflow typing. I did brochures for organizations, for some of the business colleges. I typed their curriculum books. Uh, Advertising agency. I created presentation materials for an advertising agency. I worked with law firms. I did overflow transcribing and legal documents. I realized that if I knew how to do legal word processing, that would increase my value as well as increasing my demand. So I did overflow, legal, transcription, and documents. And I also offered hours that were more competitive. Most other word processors worked between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., which is typically the same hours as most businesses. If they needed something at the end of their day, there was no way to get to it until the next day. 9 to 9 was our work time. I said, call us day or night for a job done right. So, night type business services operated from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so, if at the end of your workday you realized you had an urgent project that you needed for the next morning, we would take on that project and deliver that project by the next morning. And it was just me. I created a job for myself. I remember I hired my mom. She designed my first logo. And I also was part of a youth entrepreneurial group at that time. It was the East Oakland Youth Development Center entrepreneurial program that later, through my participation, rebranded, came up with the name Yes, Youth Entrepreneurial Services, as we moved into what was our first co-working experience. These days, when you see co-working, we did that. We did that back in the day. That organization was led by the brilliant, innovative Kathleen Sullivan, who was a young entrepreneur being exposed to entrepreneurship by her parents and wanting to help other young people step into leadership roles and create their own businesses, especially at a time that many teenagers in Oakland found themselves unable to find part time or summer employment. She put together a program and aligned the program with leaders that taught us how to really develop business plans and how to put those plans in place. We had to present before an investment committee, and we received grants towards the initial requirements for our businesses. So I was able to secure business technology. And then from that business, I also was able to begin working on my second business that emerged, the business that I really wanted to launch, which was Ardrey Associates International, which was an event marketing business. Again, now it seems common, but at that time, event marketing was a new emerging sector. So I was an innovator in that space as well. So, anyway, purpose. Don't forget about purpose and come back so that you can hear as I teach you on the other P's, the 9 P's to profit. You can pick up the book, it's out there. Show Me the Money, The 9 P's to Profit by Stephanie Ardrey, Dr. Stephanie Ardrey now, but I wrote it before I was Dr. Stephanie Ardrey. So, again, I hope you enjoy this journey and I hope you continue to follow along and gain some tips so that you can get your business or your venture launched and off and profitable. All right, take care. and I'll see you soon.